So I have a question. If people believe ISO 20022 means that XRP is going to be utilized, then why can't XRP be used already since August? Let's just say, for argument's sake, I am wrong, and the inflow translation service, the coexistence phase, and ISO 20022/MT translation all means DLT and XRP will be utilized. Then technically speaking, banks that are already live with ISO 20022, and there are many around the world that are live with ISO 20022, can already start using XRP since August 2022 by using Swift's opt-in service. Remember, those banks already live with ISO 20022 don't have to wait until November nor until March 2023, but they can opt in to use Swift's ISO 20022 exchange service since August and start using XRP. So why haven't they done it yet? Why is XRP still worth nothing? Because I'm genuinely surprised, if ISO 20022 means XRP will be used, that no bank already on ISO 20022 has yet to use XRP when they can easily opt in to do so. So what are they waiting for? Or why are they waiting for? It makes no sense to me. So here's an overview by Swift. You can see this pictures from Swift, and it's talking about the banks that are already live with ISO 20022 and the ones that are planning migration by November 2022, and the banks that are planning migration between 2023 to 2025. And this is migration to ISO 20022, by the way. So the banks that are currently live that are on Swift is the Bank of Jordan, the RTGS Bank of Jordan, Bangladesh, Philippines, and I think this is Brunei, I'm not sure. And then we have China and Switzerland. They are also live with RTGS. The RTGS system is live with ISO 20022. However, they are not on Swift, but they can connect to Swift because they have APIs to connect to Swift, and they also use the UETR, which is the unique end-to-end reference, which Swift uses when processing payments. So China and Switzerland can still leverage Swift. And then we have banks that are not on Swift and they don't have the API: Kuwait, India, Colombia, and so on. So as you can see, there are already banks that are live with Swift, and there are banks that can connect to Swift. So why are these banks not using XRP via Swift with the opt-in service that's not actually going live in November, but has been live since August 2022? Why are these banks not using XRP? And then I'm going to go a step further and say, why are these banks not using XRP and forget about Swift? Why are they just not partnering with Ripple and straight up using Ripple to process the ISO 20022 message? Because we know Ripple can do that, because Ripple is part of the ISO 20022 standards body, and they have the software technology that can recognize ISO 20022 messages for processing. So why are these banks not using DLT and Ripple for processing their message and for settlement via ODL? Why haven't they done that yet? Since China has been live with ISO 20022 since 2015, so has India since 2013, Switzerland's already live. I mean, these are major countries with major cross-border payments going on between their RTGS systems and other countries. So why are they not using XRP yet? And the point I'm trying to make here is that if ISO 20022 means XRP has to be utilized, then why are these banks not using it yet? Because there seems to be this notion that when the RTGS in Europe becomes live with ISO 20022, XRP is being utilized, has to be utilized, will be utilized. So if that's the case, then what I'm saying is, if the Eurozone has to use it because their RTGS system is going live with ISO 20022, then why are all these other banks not using it, and they have been on ISO 20022 way before the Eurozone? And that's a question I don't know if anyone can answer, because there is no actual logical sense as to why the Eurozone will be using XRP because they're migrating to ISO 20022, whereas all these other banks that have already migrated to ISO 20022, they don't have to be using XRP, or they are not using XRP, but the Eurozone will be. Anyways, so the Eurozone will migrate to ISO 20022 in March 2023, and then you have other banks as well that probably will migrate in November as well. So what is SWIFT telling people to actually do or prepare for March 2023? So SWIFT is basically telling institutions to make sure they are prepared for March 2023 when ISO 20022 processing and inflow translation services go live. However, let's take a look at how exactly are they telling institutions to actually prepare, and what are they supposed to be doing exactly to prepare for ISO 20022. What it says here on the SWIFT page is that from this date, any participant can begin sending ISO 20022 messages for CBR+, and it's referring to the date starting from March 2023. So what do they need to do? So you need to be ready to receive ISO 20022 messages and process either the ISO 20022 message or the translated MT that will be embedded within it. To ensure readiness, 1. You need to upgrade your messaging interface. 2. Configure your connectivity to the Fin Plus service. 3. Prepare your relationship management authorization setup for Fin Plus. And 4. They want you to test, and test again. So as you can see from these 4 things, the first thing they tell you to do is upgrade your messaging interface. And that makes sense because ISO 20022 is a messaging layer upgrade. However, if ISO 20022 is synonymous with XRP, then why are they not telling banks in any of these steps to make sure they upgrade their settlement layer to DLT systems? They are not saying it here at all. Not being ready will mean a break in the continuity of your business operations, with payment instructions coming from your correspondence that cannot be processed. And remember, I've said over and over again, the reason why we know they are not using DLT systems and they are not upgrading their DLT, their settlement layer to DLT, is because they are still using correspondent banking. And SWIFT, in their latest document, tells us not being ready, in other words, not upgrading your messaging interface to ISO 20022 will mean a break in the continuity of your business operations, with payment instructions coming from where? DOT systems? Nope, coming from correspondents. What are correspondents? So set up your testing environment. They want you to upgrade your testing interface, upgrade your messaging interface to a version that supports multi-format MX messages. 2, this is the testing environment. Configure your interface and set up your test connectivity. Configure your messaging interface for the Fin Plus test service, and test, self-testing or testing with SWIFT. Validate your readiness for processing ISO 20022 messages, plain or multi-format. So that's the testing environment. And then the preparing for live deployment. This is what needs to be done by March 2023. They need to make sure that their messaging interface is upgraded. Upgrade your messaging interface. They need to validate and import the Fin Plus Bootstrap. Import and synchronize RMA starting point into your messaging interface. Again, everything is about the messaging interface. Configure your interface and set up your live connectivity. Configure your messaging interface for the Fin Plus live service. So as you can see, all the 3 things is related to the messaging interface. Where is anything related to the settlement layer? Upgrading your settlement layer so that you can be using DLT systems such as the XRPL, or linking to the XRPL, or interfacing with the XRPL, or leveraging the XRPL. Anything, even if they don't say XRPL, where are they saying the RTGS system settlement layer is going to be leveraging DLT, linking to DLT, interfacing with DLT? Nothing. They are all talking about the messaging interface, because ISO 20022 is all about the messaging layer, and the settlement layer is still going to be using what they've always been using prior to ISO 20022, and that is correspondent banking. So the question I have asked over and over again is, why are they not telling banks to prepare for DLT settlement? Now, too many people are implying that in November 2022 and March 2023, when ISO 20022 goes live, that DLT will be used in the settlement layer and XRP will be used for liquidity in cross-border payments. However, no matter where you look, no bank or institution is being told to prepare their settlement layer for DLT implementation when ISO 20022 goes live. Instead, all they are being told over and over again is to prepare for ISO 20022 by upgrading their messaging interface only. So in all the documents you read about ISO 20022, it is all in relation to the messaging layer, and this is why banks are being told to upgrade their messaging layer to prepare for ISO 20022 and are not being told to change how they actually settle and process payments. So again, why are they not telling banks to upgrade their settlement layer if DLT and XRP are going to be the standard to process payments once ISO 20022 goes live? I mean, that would be a vital piece of information to actually forget to tell banks, since DLT is going to be used once ISO 20022 goes live. So why are they omitting that information? Why are they not telling banks to upgrade their settlement layer to DLT? It's a genuine question. I'm not trying to be funny. I actually don't understand why they are actually not telling banks this. Is it because there is this secret agenda where banks are already on DLT and are prepared to use XRP and are just waiting in silence to roll it out in November and March without letting us know, lying to us in all the public documents that they're releasing? Is the agenda so secret, yet the XRP community have already cracked it and have publicly revealed their secret agenda plan, that they're going to be using it in March and November when ISO 20022 goes live? Is that a possible explanation as to why they are not telling banks to prepare for DLT settlement? Or could it simply be just the most logical explanation that they are simply not using XRP in November or March, but they are still using correspondent banking as they have explicitly and publicly told us numerous times? And that's the reason why they have not told banks at all to prepare for DLT settlement, because they are still going to be using correspondent banking for settlement. So let's look at correspondent banking. Correspondent banking is basically the reason why none of the documents are talking about upgrading settlement to prepare for ISO 20022 to a DLT system. Instead, they just mention ISO 20022 is being used in relation to correspondent banking. And correspondent banking uses pre-funded liquidity with Nostro-Vostro accounts, has been how banks have been settling cross-border payments with the MT messaging system, and how they will still be doing it when ISO 20022 goes live in November 2022 and March 2023. And I've seen some people from the XRP community even go as far as to tell me that I don't even know what correspondent banking means, and that it basically means a DLT system is being used in the middle. I literally explained what correspondent banking is in my very first video in this series back in September. It has nothing to do with a DLT system when you understand what correspondent banking is. So here I have an article or a page from Investopedia, and it's talking about correspondent banking definition and how it works. So let's see what correspondent banking is based upon Investopedia's description. So what is a correspondent bank? The term correspondent bank refers to a financial institution that provides services to another one, usually in another country. It acts as an intermediary or agent, facilitating wire transfers, conducting business transactions, accepting deposits, and gathering documents on behalf of another bank. Correspondent banks are most likely to be used by domestic banks to service transactions that either originate or are completed in foreign countries. Domestic banks generally use correspondent banks to gain access to foreign financial markets and to serve international clients without having to open branches abroad. So as you can see, a correspondent bank is another intermediary bank used by another bank when they don't have branches in the foreign country abroad. So they used a correspondent bank that does have branches abroad, and they leverage that bank for their transactions, and the correspondent bank can facilitate wire transfers, it can handle deposits, gather documents on behalf of another bank, conduct business transactions, and so on. So correspondent banks are third-party banks. So when someone tells me that I don't know what correspondent banks are, and I explained what correspondent banking is in my very first video of this November series, and they're telling me that correspondent banks are DLT systems, in other words, they're trying to insinuate that correspondent banks is basically the XRPL, they are talking complete nonsense. Correspondent banks, if you just do a simple Google search, you will see that correspondent banks are nothing to do with DLT, are nothing to do with XRPL. They are basically intermediary banks, third-party banks, and this is how payments are going to be settled still when ISO 20022 goes live via correspondent banks, and they act as middlemen between different financial institutions, especially those in different countries, and this is how they're going to settle cross-border payments via correspondent banking. So the accounts held between correspondent banks and the banks for which they provide services are referred to as Nostro-Vostro accounts, and I've explained that Nostro-Vostro accounts are going to be pre-funded beforehand with the liquidity needed to process the transaction. And I've explained in my previous video, when people say, but how can a super fast messaging system work with such a slow settlement? And I've explained in that video, no, when you have a super fast messaging system and you're already using correspondent banking with pre-funded liquidity, then the pre-funded liquidity is easily credited and debited at the pace of the message. If the messaging is slow, then it takes time for the correspondent bank to process that message and to also facilitate the settlement. But if the message is fast, then the correspondent bank can facilitate the settlement at a faster pace as well, because remember, the money is already pre-funded in the bank. All the bank has to do is credit and debit accounts internally on their ledger. That's instant, that's fast. But what slowed them down before is the MT messaging standard. But the ISO 20022 messaging standard would speed things up, and I did a whole video on that. Just look at my previous 2 or 3 videos where I'm talking about Swift, and you will see I cover this in more detail. So correspondent banks are a pivotal part of the financial industry, as they provide a way for domestic banks to operate when it isn't feasible for them to open up branches in a different location, especially in a foreign country. You hear that? For instance, a small domestic bank with clients in different countries can partner with a correspondent bank in order to meet the needs of its clients internationally. Doing so also gives them access to the foreign financial market. The correspondent bank will therefore charge a fee for this service, which is usually passed off from the domestic bank to the customer. And that's how correspondent banking works. It has nothing to do with using XRP or the XRPL. So to conclude this video, I'm just going to be blunt. ISO 20022 going live by Swift or the European Central Bank RTGS system in March 2023 has nothing whatsoever to do with XRP being utilized by either of them. RTGS are using the MT messaging standard alongside pre-funded correspondent banking for settlement today, right now. That's how they're doing it. But in November 2022 and March 2023, RTGS systems will be using the upgraded MX ISO 20022 messaging standard alongside pre-funded correspondent banking for settlement. DLT systems are not replacing correspondent banking for settlement in November 2022 or March 2023. To ignore all this evidence at hand is interesting to say the least, because in my opinion this evidence is irrefutable. There is literally no evidence showing DLT and XRP is being used when ISO 20022 goes live in November 2022 or March 2023. It is all just speculation and wishful thinking being believed to be a fact. I don't want people to get me wrong. I do believe one day RTGS systems will replace correspondent banking and use DLT systems. I have said this over and over again in my series that I do believe is happening in stages, and the stage that we're going in now is ISO 20022 via correspondent banking, and the third stage would be ISO 20022 via DLT systems. And I believe that's going to happen in the future, but I don't believe it's happening in March or November or March, because they are already telling us what they're doing, and they are already telling us how they're going to be using correspondent banking still, and they are not mentioning anything about having to upgrade the settlement layer in order to be able to use DLT systems. So, like I said, I do believe one day RTGS systems will replace correspondent banking, and they will be using DLT systems for settlement alongside the ISO 20022 messaging standard. However, I can't conclude that day is in November or March or anywhere in between, because they have explicitly told us that ISO 20022 will be used alongside correspondent banking. And I find it extremely difficult to just ignore that fact and say they will be using XRP instead. So my honest advice to people is just hold your assets until utility kicks in. Be patient and don't have too much hope in XRP being utilized the moment ISO 20022 goes live, because the probability of it being used then is really low in my opinion, based on the evidence I've personally researched and presented to you throughout this entire series of videos. And that's all for now. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell notification icon so as to not miss my next video.